Thank you for those that have joined us. At this moment, we are waiting for a quorum. We are waiting for one more commissioner.
Oh, here we go.
Chair Massey,
Yes,
Commissioner Fields has joined the meeting.
yes, I see. Hello.
Hi, sorry about my tardiness.
Okay. Well, then I'd like to call this meeting of the San Mateo Park and Recreation Commission to order. Would everyone please stand and mute your microphones for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Giovanna, would you call the roll, please?
I would be happy to, Chair Massey. Commissioners Holm and Commissioner Wolnick have notified us that they will be absent today. So we will continue on with Commissioner Fields.
Yeah, I don't see her anymore. Somehow she dropped off.
Okay, let me see if I can get her back on. Okay, we will continue the roll call. I do see Commissioner Fields here. Commissioner Fields?
Present. Apologies for that. My computer decided to shut down just in the middle of this.
Thank you. Vice Chair Held?
Here.
Chair Massey?
Here.
Thank you. We do have a quorum for tonight's meeting.
Okay, very good. So this is the last of our Zoom meetings. And as a moment, we've been doing this for over 2 years. And so for the last time, I will read through for the benefit of any members of the public interested in following our proceedings, how to do so through the Zoom system. Due to the physical distancing protocols in place at this time, we continue to encourage public participation remotely. Information on how to provide public comment is explained at the top and bottom of the published agenda. There are 2 ways to participate. Join the Zoom meeting by clicking on the link at the top of the agenda. Use the raise your hand button to be called on at the appropriate time. Please unmute yourself only when called upon. Alternatively, phone-in participation can be done by calling area code 408-638-0968 with the conference ID 840-4367-1734, passcode 655587. Press *9 to raise your hand to be called on and *6 to unmute. Okay, the next item of business is our consent calendar, and that for tonight consists of approval of the regular meeting minutes of April 6th, 2022. Does anyone have any changes or comments on the minutes? Okay, seeing none, then I'd be looking for a motion and a second for approval of the minutes.
I so move.
Sarah, can we get you? Oh,
I second.
okay, great.
Sorry, I was having a little trouble with the mute and unmute.
Oh, no worries. Okay. All right, well then, Giovanna, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Chair Massey. Vice Chair Held?
Aye.
Commissioner Fields?
Aye.
Chair Massey?
Aye.
Motion has passed. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, before we go on, we offer to members of the public at this stage of our meeting the opportunity to comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. The rest of tonight's agenda consists of review of the park development impact fee credits policy considerations with a presentation by our consultant, and a review of the proposed 5-year 2022 to 27 Parks and Recreation Capital Improvement Plan. Members of the public wishing to comment on any item not appearing on the agenda, and that is to say, any item other than the two I just mentioned, may address the commission at this time. State law prevents the commission from taking action on any matter not on the agenda. Your comments may be referred to staff for follow-up. Public comment is limited to a total of 15 minutes. However, an opportunity for additional public comment may be provided later in the agenda. Giovanna, do we have any members of the public who are indicating a desire to address the commission at this time?
No, Commissioner, Chair Massey, there are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, then I will close the this public comment period and have us move on to the park development impact fee credits policy considerations item. And Sheila, I think you have a brief introduction for us, and an introduction also of our consultants. We have tonight Ben Sigmund from EPS. So over to you.
Thank you, commissioners. So last July, we had brought to the commission some policy changes that had been supported by the city council relative to changing the methodology by which our park in lieu and park impact fees were proposed to be calculated. And there was general consensus from the commission at that time that we move forward at some point with those recommended changes. The most important being that we would combine the park impact and park in lieu fee into one impact fee, and that we would eliminate the Quimby Act portion of that. Second, that there would be application to commercial projects in addition to residential projects, which was a major change, or will be a major change in terms of the types of projects that will be impacted by a park impact fee. And then lastly, there was some questions and comments on behalf of the commission relative to the credit system that we currently have, whereby projects that do come forward that provide private park and recreation amenities on site receive some credit towards their final fee. And so to that end, we went ahead and hired Economic and Planning Systems, EPS, who has been working on that for the last number of months. And we have tonight Ben Sigmund, who is representing EPS. I also want to acknowledge that we have Dennis Frank, our retired park planning administrator, and then Brian Alexander, who is a senior management analyst in the community development department, who really spearheaded the entire impact fee study for the city back in July. So I will just make a couple of comments before I turn it over to Ben. The first is that this will not be the first time this commission will see this. This is a complicated issue. And I think as you begin to hear the presentation from Ben, there is a lot of moving parts. And so I think really what we're asking from the commission tonight is really some policy direction moving forward, to sort of get the big policy direction set. So we will not be talking about formulas and calculations and how all those things work. I think that will come back at a different time. But I think we're really looking for some policy direction from the commission at this point. So with that, I will turn it over to Ben to do the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Sheila. I'm going to pop up the presentation now. Okay. Everyone can see that cover sheet?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Good evening, Chair Massey, Commissioners Field and Held. Thank you so much for having me. Ben Sigmund with Economic and Planning Systems. As Sheila said, our firm specializes in land use economics, and we have a practice area devoted to public finance. And within that, we do quite a bit of work around development impact fees, park fees being a component of that. So We were very pleased to be selected by the city to assist with this, and I'm happy to be here tonight to talk to you about the crediting of development impact fees. Just quickly starting off, I wanted to sort of give you a 30,000 foot view of the process. We kicked this off, as Sheila said, about 3 months ago, a conversation with the city, including Sheila and Dennis, Brian as well, involved early on in the scoping of the work. We got initial direction on the study and what the city was looking for. Really, the bulk of the work is examining different cities' approach to park fees and crediting against park fee obligations. We focused on primarily on the peninsula, a couple of cities in the South Bay as well. In all, we looked at 10 cities, and as Sheila said in her introductory remarks, it is a sort of complex web of sort of legislation that relates back to the Quimby Act, as well as the Mitigation Fee Act. So we have kind of picked through some of that detail. I'm gonna sort of fly above that tonight. The bulk of the work in the last month or so has been focusing in on 3 neighboring cities that do have parks fee credit policies in place, and we've interviewed all 3 cities and had follow-up conversations over email about some of the nuances of their approach and their actual implementation of the crediting practices. So that's been helpful, and I'll try to provide some of the some of the details around that in my comments tonight. And what we're doing now, we've sort of previewed this work with staff, gotten some feedback, just basically helping us tailor the presentation tonight for your consumption. And as Sheila said, we've got a number of areas where we're looking for your direction. I've tried to lay those out at the end of this presentation in a sort of question format. And I think the way I'll do it is I'll run through that, and then we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions, and we'll come back and we'll go through it in as much detail as you want. But I'm going to take a first pass just through the presentation without stopping, if that's all right. So just in terms of the overview for tonight, we're going to first talk about how the city does things today. I'm going to get into those case studies, the 3 deep dive case studies that I mentioned as a second piece, and then we get into this kind of the policy considerations. So today, the city does have a fee crediting program in place. The same exact approach is used whether it's a subdivision project that is got a parks obligation, a dedication requirement, or in lieu fees under the Subdivision Act, or a development impact fee, and that would apply to a single lot project, sort of a rental multifamily building, for example. In all cases, 2 acres per 1,000 resident standard is used to establish the parkland requirement, and all of the crediting is done on a square footage or an area basis. So that all roots back to this 2 acres per 1,000 residents. It is probably appropriate, Sheila mentioned it, but just to reiterate here, moving forward, the city likely will pivot to all development impact fees. And whereas there only are parks requirements now for residential uses, going forward, parks impact fees will apply to commercial uses, retail, hotel, office, industrial, all will be paying these fees going forward. So that's just something we want to keep in the back of our minds. So the city code is quite explicit, and you can actually get examples of the calculations for the parks credit right within the municipal code. I will spare you that. I had a slide in there on that tonight, but we'll, as Sheila said, we'll save the math for another evening. And then one thing here I do want to point out, the 50% credit is sort of a key construct of San Mateo's parks crediting program. And it's actually a sort of twofold aspect of it. One, all of the space that sort of might be brought to offset a fee obligation is discounted by at least 50%. So if you have an obligation of 100,000 square feet, and you propose, the applicant proposes 100,000 square foot open space facility that meets your other requirements, they get credit for 50,000 square feet. And that would be the maximum credit allowable. That's the sort of second aspect of it. Every project pays at least half their fee obligation in cash. We can come back to that. You'll see when we get to some of the other cities, it's a little bit different elsewhere. There is a minimum size requirement. The policy does not allow any double counting. So if a project has side yards or setbacks, those can't be counted towards their open space obligation. If the applicant is proposing a credit, they do need to have an operations and maintenance plan that's approved by the city. So they have to, the upkeep is guaranteed. It needs to be protected in perpetuity. There's a covenant requirement, so you can't sort of swap it out down the road for something else. It needs to be amenitized. There are a number of facilities we'll talk about on the next slide that the city currently requires, some that are optional, but you can't just do a grassy field. It needs to be more than that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then last point here is just some of the smaller projects have a somewhat reduced requirement for providing those amenities or facilities, and they get a commensurate sort of offset of the fee obligation. So you can see there, it can be as low as a 20% for smaller projects that bring less open space or public, or I should say, recreational facilities with limited amenities. Looking at the types of facilities that the city is requiring projects to deliver to achieve crediting. The Park Lake setting, a relatively large 10,000 square foot area, swimming pools, recreation rooms, play areas, game areas, field sports, and the trail are your sort of core list. And then there's a secondary list that are sort of optional or additional may be considered. They're not, the Parks Department would need to approve it, but you can see the list there, sort of more unique type improvements to the open space or recreation area. So garden plots or the dog park could be suitable at the discretion of the department. So now we want to start to compare that to the way other cities in our neighborhood here are doing things. And we focused on just a few of the key metrics. It can get quite a bit more complicated, but right off the bat, the three cities we really dug into, and as I said, did interviews with staff in the Park and Recreation Department, Redwood City, Mountain View, and South San Francisco. Redwood City's fee credit, parks fee credit policy has been in place about 8 years. They don't see a lot of use of this credit, but here, let me walk you through it. They do allow privately owned spaces within projects to achieve fee credit. When I'm talking about exclusive access, the idea there is a recreation area or open space that might be limited to a homeowners association. Owners of a project, for instance, would be allowed to use it, but not the general public. And in the case of Redwood City, they allow credit for that type of open space or recreation facility, but it's discounted. So you only get 25 cents on the dollar for limited access or exclusive access recreation and open space. And you can see in the right-hand column, I'm mentioning cents on the dollar because they do give the credits based on dollars, not area. You can, though, with a fully publicly accessible facility or open space, achieve 100% of your fee obligation offset through the crediting program. And key criteria, the reason they're not seeing any use of the program is because it has a minimum 1 acre requirement, which is a relatively, in the urban environment here, a relatively large open space to contribute towards recreation and parkland. And so they attribute the fact that their fee level is quite low and land values are quite high to the lack of use. Their applicants over the last 8 years have entirely chosen to pay the fee. In addition to the 1 acre minimum, just a little bit of detail on that. 25% of the area needs to be for active recreation uses. 50% needs to be essentially open, relatively flat grass space. and they require 500 square foot blocks. So it has to be fairly rectangular. You can't end up with sort of slivers here or there, or funny shaped open spaces. They're looking for essentially playing fields. And they do have improvement requirements as well, different amenities that they would require for the applicants to achieve the crediting. In Mountain View, their policy is about a year old, and they spent almost a year developing it. Of the three, it's the sort of the one that's hot off the presses, and based on my understanding, received the most attention from staff and from council, as well as their commission. They are focused on what they call the POPA, the privately owned, publicly accessible open spaces, and they credit those at a rate of 75%, and so 75 cents on the dollar there for the privately owned open space. They also have a minimum size that's a bit of a hurdle for most projects. It's a 0.4 acre requirement, and it has also an added requirement of 100-foot dimensions. So again, no slivers. They had a lengthy debate at the council hearing about whether triangles would be acceptable. So it just interesting, the conversation about the geometry of these spaces. They also have a list of improvements that are required. They are really trying to channel their projects that are seeking credit into delivering open space that is a lot like a public park. They're looking for frontage on a public road, signage, water stations, bathroom facilities. Those are all required. So at the end of the day, it really does come out looking quite a bit like a traditional city park. In conversation with them, they are not seeing a tremendous amount of interest in the park fee credits from their typical infill development projects. But as you may know, in Mountain View, they have a couple of specific or precise plan areas that contemplate campus development, larger master plan areas. And in those larger scale projects, those mixed use campuses, there's quite a bit of interest in delivering the parkland in return for an offset to the park fee obligation. And again, here in Mountain View, it's the crediting is done on fair market value. They do appraisals annually across the city to establish land value, and that's the basis of the crediting. South San Francisco has the oldest code. It's probably from the 80s. It's not seeing a lot of use these days. They primarily apply it. The code is really written for their subdivisions. They do not have code in place for single lot projects. And because most of their projects, multifamily, have been rental, not condominium, they haven't had a lot of projects that really qualify for it. That said, going back in time, they certainly have used it. Their code is most like yours. They do allow privately owned. They do allow the exclusive access. So homeowners association, rec facilities. They also require that half of the fee obligation be paid in cash. So you can't completely credit out of your fees. But they do not. This is the distinction I tried to set us up for here. They do not do any discounting. So if the applicant, I should say, proposes a 50,000 square foot open space, they can get credit for 50,000 square feet against their obligation. They can't offset all of their fees that way. So there's no discount, if that makes sense. And we can try to clear that up. I know it's a point of a bit of complexity. I think I also want to mention about South San Francisco, that while they haven't got or they haven't used it so much, what they did talk to us a bit about, which is of interest, is that they've provided credit against park fee obligations in their development agreements. So they have a number of, the life science campuses developed on the waterfront, and there they have through development agreements accepted open space in exchange for offset credit burdens. And so they've really followed, what the staff tells us is while they don't follow it to the letter of the code, the same basic principles, the 50% max, for instance, have applied to their treatment of open space delivered as part of these larger campuses that are done within a development agreement. And development agreement, you really have, cities have the ability to negotiate pretty much anything they want. But interesting here that they use their code as just sort of a guiding light when negotiating the park obligations as part of these larger projects. So we can come back during the Q&A to that. Here I wanted to just set up at 30,000 feet, the key policy considerations. I'm going to go into sort of the next level of detail on the following slide, but right off the bat, we have to decide if you even want to allow crediting. Don't have to. If you, and I'll speak more about that in a moment. If we do allow crediting, the secondary decision that we see, and I guess just should have said it before, we're thinking clean slate. You obviously have a precedent for the way you do things now, but going forward with, particularly with a transition out of Quimby Act dedication requirements and into a brand new Mitigation Fee Act, Development Impact Fee world, we can do things completely different. So if you do decide you want to allow projects to bring their own open space and recreation facilities, I think there's a key decision here about whether we're interested in providing any credit or discounted credit for these exclusive facilities that aren't open to the public. Or if we'd prefer to really focus on projects that deliver essentially fully publicly accessible open space, something that's more like a traditional city park. So let's peel back the onion here. A lot of words on the screen, but we'll go through these. And I think the idea is I'm going to go through them now, like I said, and then we'll put this back up and let you all sort of really provide your thoughts as you'd like to in a moment. So the first, as I said, should the city provide credit for privately owned recreation spaces? And so if the answer is no, the idea is that the city would collect development impact fees from residential and commercial projects and essentially buy land and execute your capital improvement plan. It's the money to it's the money to build the parks in your plan. Alternatively, private projects can deliver open space and recreation facilities that fulfill the same goals. So that would be the benefit of allowing crediting. And also worth mentioning that if you allow crediting, there's ownership and maintenance that's taken on by the owner of the property that essentially takes some burden off the city for the long term. But on the flip side, you don't have full control. Two, should the city provide credit for the exclusive access recreation facilities? If the answer is no, we really want traditional city parks, but yes, we think these exclusive facilities satisfy demand that would otherwise be met by city parks. That's I think the primary argument for yes on the exclusive access. If folks are swimming in the pool at the apartment complex, they are not necessarily needing to swim in the city's pool. Three, should the city reduce credit for privately owned recreation spaces? This is not so much a binary. It's should we provide it? Should we set a discount rate because we don't think it's quite as good that it's privately owned? That's essentially what Mountain View has done, or we think it's an advantage to the development entity to be able to do this. So we provide some discounts. So in Mountain View, just for example, there it's that 75 cents on the dollar for anything that's a privately owned, publicly accessible open space. Or we really want to encourage it, and we think we're going to give it full value against its fee obligation. So it's just as good as a city-owned facility. And then again, on the exclusive use, question 4 here, we can do the same thing with discounting, just like Redwood City. So there, the exclusive access homeowners association type facilities are a 25% on the dollar credit versus a fully publicly accessible during park hours open space or recreational facility that's 100%. So is there an adjustment we want to make to incentivize full public access or not. Moving on. Should the city limit the overall degree to which credits are used or may be used to offset fees? And so this is, do we want to make sure that even if we allow crediting, there's always some fee payment, there's always some cash that's coming in to the department for land acquisition and capital improvements. And that's essentially the way things are now with the 50% cap. Every project pays at least half its fee bill. And you can see here that the benefit of having that revenue come in is that it could be an important funding source. That said, not every project's going to do the crediting. You're always going to have some fee revenues coming in. So should the city require that private park and recreation area, and I put here in total, be a minimum size? And I just wanted to clarify. So we're not talking about that the pool needs to be 2,000 square feet or that the natural space needs to be 10,000 square feet. It's more the idea that we see in both Redwood City and Mountain View that we want, a substantial acreage or substantial area, kind of critical mass for recreational enjoyment, and that the pocket park or what have you, the small space is not valuable to us. So we've seen these other cities kind of have this minimum size requirement for the total open space recreation facility. And so that's that question. And then the question 7, should the city require defined park improvement features? Almost everybody does, but you don't have to. So this is the the list we looked at a moment ago for San Mateo. So where you currently specify pools and the fields. Let me look at the list to get it right here. So currently, park-like settings, swimming pool, rec area, children's play area, court games, field sports, loop trail. Those are the core facilities now, but you don't necessarily have to have that. You could certainly require level graded, drained, accessible flat space. That could be, so I foresee more that this turns into a discussion down the road of what's the list, but to be determined. And then lastly, channeling Mountain View again, and the degree to which they're really trying to recreate a traditional city park here. How do we want to credit or require access? So does it need to be on a public road? Does there need to be signage? Certainly we have fully publicly accessible parkland that's sort of tucked away in some of these campuses on the peninsula. And if you find it, it can be a gem, but that it's just worth thinking about the degree to which we want to encourage public access and public knowledge of the availability of these park and recreation areas. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to let you guys ask me some questions. I think we'll put it out to the public to comment, and then we bring it back for discussion, I think is how it goes, but you all tell me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. There's certainly a lot there.
There
and
is.
a lot to think about. Talking to my fellow commissioners here, do you have questions? Just either one of you start.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Ben, first of all, thank you for your presentation. Quite a bit to think about, several sort of yes, nos, and let's think about it. But I'm curious if you can, I'm just looking for you to add a little more color to this, to whatever extent you can. I know the last 2 years have been a little bit atypical for a lot of different industries. And I'm wondering if you can tell us, to what extent, when there are these restrictions placed, like in Mountain View or in Redwood City, are developers still taking advantage of these credits and of these systems? And does this incentivize anything?
Got it. Let me try to comment on that. So I think, yes, the last 2 years have been extraordinarily abnormal. Within the real estate development industry, it has been project entitlements have continued. We have seen definitely a drop off in housing starts in the Bay Area in the last year or so, but it hasn't been one of these industries that's been any kind of sort of full stop or severe disruption. I think, the construction costs have gotten very high, and rent growth is sort of flattened. So it's a challenging moment for some projects, but the industry, sort of continues on. I think that what we're hearing from staff in Redwood City and in Mountain View is that it's not a function of the industry or the economy. In Redwood City, the full acre requirement it's a significant amount of space. It has to be a project of scale to even have a parkland obligation that's at that 1 acre requirement. So it's really designed for the larger projects, and that their typical infill multifamily project at 100 or 200 units is just not taking advantage of it. The sites are tight, they're maximizing housing development, and like I say, in Redwood City, the fee that we had a follow-up conversation with staff there. Their fees are relatively low, where that they have a number of priorities when the city council puts together the fee levels. And the way Mitigation Fee Act works is that there's a study that has to be done that establishes the sort of fair cost you can charge for different kinds of fees, and then the council will adopt it that maximum or lower. And what ends up happening is their highest priority issues for funding, like affordable housing, get adopted closer to the maximum, and things like parks unfortunately have fallen down the list a little bit, so the fees are a lesser percentage of their maximum possible. So it's a modest fee. So it's the combination of the large minimum requirement, and the relatively low fee is what's driving the use of I think the fee program over the crediting. And then in Mountain View, I think the 0.4 acres, again, from staff's comment, it's a relatively high quantity of open space to provide. Not many projects can do it. The typical infill project cannot do it. Multifamily mixed-use project on El Camino Real cannot do it. But when they're North Bay Shore, plenty of opportunity for those campuses to do it, and they are pursuing it there. And also their East Westman precise plan. They have some larger master plan areas there where the 0.4 acres is very doable, and so that's where it's sort of, I think, intended to be used and will be used. So I all that to say, I don't think it's sort of an industry sort of economics thing. I think it's sort of the project. They've established crediting such that the larger scale master plan projects could take advantage of it, whereas a typical medium scale infill project really can't.
Okay, thank you. I have a follow-up question that may be more for Sheila. Do you know, in Station Park Green, they have a small playground? Did you know about what the footprint of that playground is?
So I don't recall, Dennis, I don't know if that's going back a few years. And so,
I know, I'm just trying to visualize the size.
Yeah, I don't recall what the size of that playground was.
All right. Well, maybe we can figure it out later. I'm trying to visualize how little we could go that would still be meaningful. We'll figure it out. Okay, those are my questions.
Well, and just on that, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There's the visualizing the space and thinking about, well, what's a meaningful park? And then the other part of it is taking that 2 acres per 1,000 and say, and recognizing, what kind of parkland obligation different types of projects will generate. So a 100-unit project, a 200-unit project, versus some larger master plan that you may see overlaid onto one of your retail centers that could be, hundreds of units, where that size project, number of units, population calculation, I think can also sort of help you think through where you're sort of creating that threshold number, that hurdle. Yeah.
For that, that's helpful.
Okay.
Ben, I have an easy one for you. In terms of exclusive access facilities, you mentioned homeowners associations. What else would be a good example of that?
That may be the only example
Okay.
that I know. And maybe Dennis could comment. I mean, this conversation that I've had with these various cities around us, it's been the homeowners association, gym, dog park, yard, playground, pool. I don't know if there's any precedent for any sort of fee for service type facility. Not that I know of.
Okay,
You know, it's primarily a homeowners association
got it.
that would fit in that category. And again, perhaps someone else on the line here has another example, but that's the one I've been made aware of.
Mhm. That's helpful. Thank you.
Anything else?
Back to you, Chris.
We've talked about these three other cities, and the one thing that they all seem to have in common to a greater or lesser extent is that their programs aren't used very much. And I'm curious, and again, this may be more a question for Sheila. Is our program used very much? Our existing.
So, yeah, I'll just make a general comment and then maybe defer to Dennis. I mean, I think that unless it's a very small project, I think that in most cases, there is some credit given for the provision of park and recreation amenities on site. I think one of the issues that's quite different from San Mateo than others is that we do have some minimum square footage requirements, but they're not at the threshold of a 0.4 acre or an acre that some of the other cities have. So again, but I see Dennis, and you may want to comment because Dennis is the one that's been doing all the calculation of the fees.
Yeah, I would say under 100 unit project, you're probably not going to get much credit at all, hardly any. Projects that are 1 to 500 units, or maybe up to 1,000, or maybe up to 500, we've been seeing that they would get probably about 12 to 15% fee credit, even though your maximum is 50. They just don't qualify because they don't want to provide that much space. So it works out to about 12 to 15%. Some of the larger projects, like the Peninsula project that's happening above the where Burrell used to be, just below where Burrell used to be, and above the golf course, the private golf course that's out there. There's a pretty big project in there. So they will probably get maybe up to 25% credit, but nothing close to 50%.
And what has our experience been with this? Is this something that, and I'm just thinking of staff and maybe the council that in the management of this and the experience with these projects over the years. Is this something that has been viewed as a positive thing, that we have reduced the amount of fee revenue that we get, but in return, we're getting these projects to provide additional facilities? Is this a trade-off that staff is kind of looking to reconsider, or because the other way of looking at this is that this is kind of a good thing, and that we have a program and the program actually gets used. Whereas listening to the story about these other cities, and I understand that it's by design and that there's been a choice made to more or less limit the credit to only the largest projects. And that's that's fine. But are we unhappy with the way we've been doing this, or is this something that maybe we're viewing as a strength of our program?
I guess I would say it's just, I know that the developers like it, but sometimes it's a make or break for some developers, whether they get qualified for some credit or not. But it could get not real time consuming. It does take some time to figure out these credits and tell them where they're at in their project in terms of how they're doing with credit. You got to communicate that to them early, and so that they know how to deal with it.
I mean, I agree very much with Dennis. I think the other thing is that I don't know. I mean, when you look at a development project, the park impact or park in lieu fee is only one of a number of, of impact fees or assessments that a project has. And so I don't know that it can specifically be any greater burden than any others. I think for that, you probably want to get the input of more developers on that. So I think that, I think as Dennis says, I think and I think it's very much on a case-by-case basis. I think some developers will work really hard to try and get the maximum they can. And they'll come back several times after Dennis speaks with them and says, okay, I've added this amenity, so I'll get more credit. Others, I think, frankly, it doesn't make any difference. So I don't know that there is a generalization that can be made about that.
I was thinking more, though, from the city's point of view, that because the city pays the price for these credits in the sense that we don't collect the level of fee that we would otherwise. Has there been a general sense over time that this trade-off is worth it? Because it seems as though these other cities, maybe not so much. That, if you're talking about a really large project where they can afford to set aside some significant tracts of land for these park projects, and possibly make them publicly accessible and all that. But if that only happens once in a while, they're okay with it. It seems as though with us, maybe we've got a higher percentage of projects in San Mateo that end up qualifying for some level of credit. And, the result of that is that there are facilities being built that are a supplement to our city parks. Have we viewed that historically as being a good thing, or is that something that in rethinking all of this, you're thinking, maybe that isn't so great?
I think it's a bit of a mix. I think that, and quite frankly, I think a lot depends on the type of facilities that are being provided. And I think that, as a developer, I think you're looking at sort of both sides. You're looking at, can I reduce the amount of fee I'm paying to the city because I'm providing amenities on site? But the other side is that am I providing amenities that will attract either renters or buyers to my project? Sure. And so there is that balance there in terms of, for some people, maybe a, private tennis court is very valuable versus a children's playground that may not be used much because the development itself is really not focusing on attracting families. So I think a lot may depend on the actual type of facilities that are being provided. And I think to that extent, again, if you're providing a playground that might be in a development where there are a lot of families, then it probably does lessen the burden of those families having to travel to the neighborhood park because they can go downstairs or go down to the lobby and have their children go out on a playground without having to walk, a quarter mile to a park. other amenities, maybe not so much. And so I think it's, as we've said, it's a bit of a complex issue in terms of having, what are amenities that people will want to take advantage of that will also sell the value of their development for renters or buyers, versus looking at amenities simply to be able to reduce the amount of fee they pay the city.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. That's really that was the area I wanted to explore. So I don't have anything else.
If I may.
Yeah.
Just to sort of pile on, I do agree with Sheila. As multifamily developers sort of compete for renters, they are definitely touting the amenity list at the project, right? And so in some cases here, we may be crediting project amenities they might have built anyway without an incentive, for one. Or they may get because of the higher rent or the ability just to rent the units quicker, it could pencil for them without a credit. So just one thing to consider. And then Sheila or Dennis may want to comment further on it. I think another advantage though on the other side of the coin here is that it's challenging for the city to acquire land. So getting projects that bring space as part of their development is a benefit in that regard. I think we early on in the conversations, just really learned from this team about how hard it is to find future parkland, and so projects that bring this built-in recreational benefit is a credit to the program.
Yeah, most of we haven't received land since Bay Meadows was built. And before that, I don't know when we've ever received land. Yeah, it's basically the fees are needed. We don't get any general fund money for CIP. It's basically for taking care of what we have. Playgrounds get old, replace them. Pathways get old. So we just need to renovate our parks every so often to keep them, keep their life cycle alive.
Okay. All right. Any other questions that anybody has? All right. Well, then this would be a moment to open the public comment period. Yeah, I think there's some blurb I'm supposed to read about that, but do you mind help me a bit here to open the public comment? We just open the public comment and then we ask the members of the public if they're members of the public who want to comment, then they go through you to do this. Yes.
Yes, they would. We would ask them to raise their hands.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll open the public comment period and let's see if we have any people who wish to comment on this issue.
We do have Martin Wiggins. Martin, if you can please unmute yourself.
Good evening, Chair Massey and Parks Commission. Thank you, Mr. Sigmund, for the presentation. Just a couple of comments. Just a minor nitpick. I would have preferred to have been able to see this presentation in advance. It was not made available, so just something to consider in the future. I didn't find it to be, I don't know that it would have been problematic for me to have viewed it in advance, but it was a lot of good information, and so I was just trying to digest it on the spot. And so just as a citizen calling in, I live in Hayward Park. Couple notes, we have a very small park in our neighborhood, Hayward Square. That is a fifth of an acre, 8,000 square feet, just for scale. And that is small, but it's kind of the only thing we can walk to. So I feel like there could be value in small spaces to be considered. And then otherwise, really just feel like it would be a shame if we were just getting the fees and they were just improving what we have. Certainly that needs to be done. But if we're going to have more residents and you listen to the planning commission, it sounds like we might, then I think we would need more parks. And so I feel like we need the land, you need more land to do that, but then you also need to have money. And I think based on the next agenda item, there's not always as much money as you want. So I guess I'm just trying to suggest a diversity of park options, so long as they're publicly accessible. I don't think me or my kids care. And just thinking that if more people move here, we're going to need more land for parks. And I think that's the point kind of the whole nexus, and you establish the, the need and the goal for 2 acres per 1,000 residents. So that was it. Thank you for your time and your hard work.
Thank you very much. Do we have anybody else?
There are no other attendees at this time, Chair Massey.
Okay, well then we will thank Mr. Wiggins for his comments and close the public comment period and bring this back to the commission for comments. Now, Sheila, maybe you can give us some guidance here. Ben has posed a whole series of questions here. Are you looking for us to respond specifically on all of these questions? Are you looking for something more general? Are you looking for something more specific? I'm not clear on what would be helpful to staff on this.
So I think what, excuse me, I think what would be helpful to staff is that if Ben could go back and pose those last couple of slides with those general policy questions. I do think that in order to really move forward, I think we at least need to get some of these larger policy issues, as in, do you want to give credits or not? That's a fairly easy one. Do you want to give a lesser level of credits to facilities that are only available to the residents versus the public? So I think at least going through the general kind of policy issues at this point, I think would be helpful, because I think without this, it's going to be difficult for staff and for consultants, as we continue to engage them, to actually then come up with a proposed plan moving forward.
Okay, no, that's fine. Excuse me. Let's start from the top, and maybe what we'll do is just go through each question, and each of the three of us can comment on that, and then we'll move to the next. Fellow commissioners, does that sound okay to you? That's a way to do this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, well, let's take it from the top then. Should the city provide credit for privately owned recreation spaces? Should we have a credit program at all? Thoughts?
I'm comfortable with the idea of a credit.
Okay.
Yeah, I support credits as well.
That makes three of us. Okay.
Consensus, amazing.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it'll get harder, I suspect. Okay. Should the city provide credit for exclusive access recreation facilities? And that is facilities that would only be available to homeowners, or I guess renters would be in that category as well. Thoughts on that?
I think no.
Not at all, or discount?
I think not at
Oh,
all.
that's the next question. No, don't.
Oh.
Let's start with, do you think we should provide credit for that kind of facility at all?
So I don't think so. I think that credit should be given to places that are publicly accessible. I think it's fine for them to be privately owned and privately built, but I think they should be if the city is foregoing funds that we could be receiving, then I think there should be a public benefit for everyone, because those funds would be benefiting the full public. I heard Ben's argument that maybe you'd reduce capacity in other public spaces, but I don't think it's good enough.
Okay. Commissioner Held?
I am leaning towards yes. I feel like I need more information to be able to go deep on this and actually provide valuable feedback. But I would lean towards yes, and we can get into 3 and 4, but I would just reduce credits.
Well, that's basically where I'm coming from. Also, I don't think I would be prepared to say definitely no. And this is another situation where it would be worth knowing sort of how much of this we've actually done, and what sorts of facilities are being used this way. And to some extent, I think what at least makes sense to me is this notion of maybe the smaller facilities being exclusive access, that things like playgrounds or wading pools or that sort of thing, that those things are actually providing a benefit that, absent those facilities, we would have to be providing it through the city parks. So I think this needs more development, but I wouldn't say no.
I agree with you.
So I'm sorry, just before you move on, I think because right now we don't differentiate, we can't give you any history in terms of that. I would say, and I'll look to Dennis again, in that probably the majority of the facilities that are provided are currently exclusive access facilities. Again, because we don't differentiate between credit that we give more or less to for privately accessible versus publicly accessible, it's kind of hard to say. But again, I've looked to Dennis, but I think the type of facilities that we get, and probably more importantly, some of the locations of where they are within a development, would not lend themselves to public access, frankly. But Dennis, anything else you want to add on that?
Whoops.
But you muted yourself, Dennis. Dennis, you muted yourself. There
Oh,
you go.
okay. Yeah, the only thing that comes to my mind is Station Park Green, that space, that lawn area that's kind of is located in the front area, which I think was placed there with the intent of having it be a social kind of gathering space during lunch hours, associated with maybe some of the commercial buildings that were there. But that's the only, the other one is on the project that's being designed at in for a planning application. I think it was approved too, over by across from Concar, where that shopping center is. Offhand, I can't think of the name, but they were providing some open space areas there that would be open to the public.
Is that the Conquer Passages?
Yeah, Concar Passage. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. There are some open spaces in the interior of that area that would be accessible to the public. And I think there's some like a walkway system through the project that probably would be open. Portions of it would be open to the public as well. That's the only places I know where publicly accessible space was provided.
What's
Everything
interesting
else is
about
private. Yeah.
What's interesting about that is those are the mixed use projects, right? So if there's a retail commercial office component, then you're going to have folks coming in from the outside anyway. And so that having that publicly accessible may make sense versus a strictly single-use residential project.
Right.
Okay. Well, let's move on then to question 3. Should the city reduce credit for privately owned recreation spaces? And what I am getting from that question is it's a question of whether the credit available should be discounted, in the sense that if 100 is spent on this, maybe they only get the credit 25 or 50. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we do give credit to privately owned space, especially if it's exclusive, then it should be reduced. Sorry, I'm combining 3 and 4.
I agree. I think it makes sense.
Same.
Although, listen, I would say this: if it's available to everyone, maybe it shouldn't be reduced, because if it functions in the same way as a park, I mean, like the person who commented, Mr. Wiggins said, you know, if you're playing in a park, you're not really thinking, did the city build this swing set or did this developer own a swing set? You're just having a nice time, probably, I hope. So, I mean, if it's publicly accessible, I think it doesn't matter. But I think a reduced credit is appropriate if it's exclusive use.
Agree.
Now, that makes sense to me as well.
Great.
Okay, now that's as many questions as we can see, but I know there are more, so yeah, there we go. Okay.
If I could just follow up, I don't want to push too hard. You guys are doing great. The depth of the discount, you know, did you have a reaction to the 25% that Redwood City uses? Does that feel like that is the value, not that? So a 75% discount, and that's for the exclusivity. Just I'd take any comments on the depth of discounting, though we may save that for the next round.
I don't know. Do either of you? I don't really have a feeling about that.
Neither. We look to the pros for counsel on that.
Yeah.
Ben, you're saying the city right now is 50%, right?
Yes, your discount
you
is
got
currently
50 or
50%, and
less than what we are offering, or more than what we're offering.
and so, you know, my question, it's sort of about trying to put the desirability of that exclusive access facility on a spectrum, right? So, you know, based on Commissioner Field's comments, you know, her sort of general preference would have been to not have exclusive access at all. So, you know, she might be closer to the 25%, whereas someone else who's thinking, hey, that really does offset demand on city facilities, and I like those things, not quite as much, but I like them, so I might give it 75%, you know, towards the other end. But I think I've picked up that there's a spectrum, and we can probably leave it at that.
I think that would be good. Should the city limit the overall degree to which credits may be used to offset fees? So right now, as you just mentioned, we have a 50% cap that at most a project can offset 50% of its fee obligation, but it's going to have to pay the other 50%. Are we happy with that? Do we want to change how that's done in either direction? What are the thoughts on that?
I guess that sounds like the right balance. It sounded like from what Dennis Frank was saying, and Sheila, I think, implied this as well, that there's a need for funds, that's what helps our parks to stay maintained and current. And so it sounds like there's a need for the funds. I mean, look, it may be possible to offset a little bit higher than that, but I don't know. I'd look for guidance from staff here on that.
Commissioner Held?
Yeah, no, I would agree.
I think the 50% seems like a reasonable number, and I guess going through this, I've been sort of looking at the various aspects of our existing program and whether and to what extent we should be considering changing them. This is not one that I feel like we need to change. I think we should be limiting the degree to which credits can be used, and 50% is a number. It's reasonable and it's time honored, and so that's where I would come out on this.
Let me just ask, in terms of, I know Dennis had commented earlier that, depending upon the size of projects, the credit can be anywhere of, perhaps as low as, 12% and maybe a little bit higher. Dennis, are you aware of any projects that have really ever gotten close to 50% in any circumstance?
I'd have to check back with, the Concar Passage might come close. And, Station Park Green, I forgot, what that was, but I think it was pretty hefty.
Okay.
That's my recollection.
But I think that, just as I think that there are really going to be, just based upon the examples that Dennis threw out, it's really going to be those larger size projects that really have more land capacity to be able to provide areas for open space or amenities versus, and those are, at least what we've seen recently, you've got just a couple of these projects here in the recent past, whether or not through the general plan changes that there might be more of those going forward. But I think that in terms of, I think it's a good standard in terms of thinking that even the projects that we have seen haven't really reached that 50% threshold.
And I'll just add that I think there are some interaction effects with some of the following questions here. So if you, for instance, you decide that you really do want the larger areas, and you do whatever it is, a quarter acre, a half acre, some sort of minimum threshold. That means you're going to have your typical modest sized project always paying the fees. So there's going to be cash flow from the smaller projects, and it may be that when you do get a bigger project that comes along, you'd actually like it to deliver a big park, and capping them out at 50% may, could have some unintended consequences. So we just, something as we, hear through the rest of the discussion, we're not locking in our answers here necessarily. We'll consider those interaction effects as we go.
I think that's a very interesting point, and I think it's an area we're going to have to come back and talk about again. But I think there's a lot to be said for that approach. Excuse me. So the next, should the city require that private park and recreation area in total be a minimum size, which is, I guess, exactly what we were just talking about. And I don't know what my fellow commissioners think about it. From my standpoint, I just don't think we're ready to be very definitive about that right now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I also think we do have some delightful small parks in San Mateo, and I don't know, I can imagine something small still being meaningful. I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion on this one. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah.
I would agree. I don't think we need to over-engineer that one at this point.
Then moving on, should the city require defined park improvement features, which is basically what we do now? Or are we saying unimproved open space is valuable and we should be giving credit for that?
I think we want to define features.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. if they're getting a credit, we should be able to say, we'd like some, what we like.
Yeah, well, in other words, you have a development and, well, for example, I mean, it's really a thing unto itself, but Bay Meadows, basically that's what was done, is that the community park in Bay Meadows was a land grant from the developers to the city. And there was a negotiation around the fees, and I forget the mechanics of the whole thing, but basically what was delivered was unimproved open space, along with, as I recall, an amount of money that was intended for development of the park. So, and that was kind of a one-off because the project is so large. But we have done this, and what if there's another large project? I mean, Bay Meadows was 83 acres, but what if we have 40 acres at some point, and we have a developer who says 40 acres, I'm willing to part with an acre, but I don't want to invest any money in it. I don't want to get involved in building park facilities. And maybe I'm even willing to pay some of the fee and you use that to do what you want with the park. Are we going to say, no, if you don't build the things that we want built, then no deal? And I don't think it's as easy a choice as it looks on the surface. But anybody else, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it would make sense to have some sort of caveat like what you're describing, although I think Bay Meadows was a once in a lifetime kind of thing. I'm not sure there's really any other place that, I mean, I'm just not sure that we're going to see another similar type development. But I hear what you're saying. Like, I think it's reasonable to want to make some kind of carve out for something exceptional like that. But I think for the most part, what we're going to see is smaller spaces where we would want to see, a specific plan for this space.
Yeah, I that would make sense to me.
But how do you balance the two? I think to Chair Massey's point, we don't want to limit ourselves, right? Like, I mean, I hope Bay Meadows is not a once in a lifetime, given what that's provided. So like, how do you balance those two without so that we have flexibility?
I've noted this. I think great conversation around this, and just a couple of comments. The larger projects very well may end up being development agreements, in which case they're sort of out from under this. And then secondarily, in Mountain View's policy, they do allow sort of a flexible option. So they have their list, and then they say, or you can come up with something creative, approvable at our discretion.
That would make sense to me.
Okay, got it.
Okay, moving on to, should the city require visibility, access, and or signage requirements? Now, when you say access, I'm not sure what that means, because to me, when you start talking about access, you're talking about disability access. So I'm not sure that that's what you're driving at here.
Correct. Thank you for the clarification. Really here trying to get a little bit of a read on, again, the desire to have these open spaces and recreational facilities mimic a traditional city park. So it's vehicular access, parking, visibility, as I mentioned, Mountain View's requirement that the open space be on a public right of way. How, so that's really it here. Is just, it's probably almost a secondary level question of the kind of degree to which we're seeking open space and facilities that perform in a lot of ways like a city-owned public park. And I think you could keep going with that. Any city public park and really, actually any private facility as well would meet the ADA requirements. So that, I guess that's a given.
I guess like rules and regulations too might be part of that too. Should they conform to the city's rules and regulations? I'm also thinking of maybe some sort of a buffer zone between the park and the residential units, so that the park is not impacting the units.
Thoughts on that?
Parking seems a little like it's already a residential area. I don't think parking beyond what we already require feels necessary. I think the question of signage is an interesting one, because if there's, let's say, a playground behind a residential building and people don't know about it, like I'm thinking, especially at Station Park Green, I was asking about that. There's a really lovely playground. I hope people know about it. But whenever I walk by, I never see anybody playing in that playground. And I think it's because people don't know about it. And I think I live in 19th Avenue Park, and when I walk by Concar Park, there's always kids playing in that park. And I think it's just a little bit more visible, but also it's there in the midst of all those homes. So I think I agree with signage. I'm not sure about the other aspects. Because I want people to know, if we've given a credit to the developer, we want people to then use it. So I want to make sure people know about it, but I think the other elements, I don't think they're as necessary.
That would make sense to me. Commissioner Held?
Yeah, I agree. I think it makes sense to do it, but in a way that's just smart and is not burdensome or unnecessary.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that play area at Station Park Green was meant to be accessible to the public. I thought it was like common private.
There is a gate around it, but it's never locked. So I'm not actually sure now that I'm thinking about that park. So maybe it's not meant to be a public amenity, but if it was, they're not doing a very good job at it. It's something to look into, but either way, like I can imagine as these developments happen that it may not be so obvious to the public when these amenities get put in that they're available to them. And so I would just want to make sure that that's clear, but I think the other things aren't necessary. But thank you for that, Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember now. Is this the end or is there more?
That's it.
You've done it. Thank you.
All right. All right. I want to put out, before we leave this issue, a marker. I don't want us to be talking about it tonight, 'cause it's not really part of the presentation, etc. But one of the things that has been talked about with our program, and I think, Sheila, you mentioned it at the beginning, is that whatever we end up doing going forward, it's going to involve the imposition in some form of park fees on non-residential projects, and the potential, at least for those projects, to provide creditable facilities. And I think that's presents a bunch of issues different from residential. And I do not want us getting into it tonight, but I think that we need a marker for the next time we come together on this to talk about that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. And it was a comment that I shared with Ben as we were going through this. Because I do think that when you start talking about different types of commercial, and whether it's an office development or a industrial complex or a hotel. I mean, do you give credit to the hotel because they put in a swimming pool for their guests? So I do think it's a slightly different animal in terms of that moving forward. I think I would just caution the commissioners as they are going to look at this in the future is that in any of these, particularly whether they be office or, large park campuses of certain kinds of businesses or whatever, and that is that we're really talking about facilities that are dedicated as part of the building of the project, not that when somebody comes in with a retail development and 6 months later they come in and rent to a yoga studio, they're not going to get credit for that at the time of their construction. That it really is at the time of construction, not what happens later on in terms of that. And I remember at our previous discussion, there was some question about, well, if a fitness business moves in, should they get credit for that? And I guess I would just urge you to remember that it is the construction of the project, not who eventually uses it in terms of that. So anyway, I would just leave that for a secondary discussion.
Thank you for that. I agree 100%. Any final comments from the commission on this before we thank Ben for his considerable time and efforts on this on our behalf and move on to the next item? Going once, going twice? No? Okay. Ben, thank you so much. Your work on this has been impressive, and I know we've only just begun. So
Thank you all as well. I really appreciate the thoughtful commentary tonight.
good. Well, I'm glad we were
Thanks,
helpful.
Ben.
Okay.
Very good.
Thanks, Ben.
Yes, much appreciated.
All right.
All right. So the next item on our agenda is the proposed 5-year Parks and Recreation Capital Improvement Plan. And we're going to have a brief presentation from staff and then a review by the commission. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, good evening. Commissioner Fields Held and Chair Massey. Good evening. My name is Nicholas. I've presented to you a number of times before, so thank you once again for this evening. I've got to say this is a wonderful segue because of the fact that we were just talking about the credits, and this is the flip side of what happens with the monies that we receive, and in particular how the revenue is collected in any given year. So as we were saying before, we were discussing the collection the mechanism of calculating credits and for developers. But this is the flip side where any qualifying development has to make a payment in lieu of, in lieu fee or impact fee as part of the application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a very short presentation that's going to speak to one of the challenges that we have when we plan for the 5-year CIP. So I'm going to just bear with me. So hopefully you can all see my screen. Please let me know. Wonderful. Yes. So with the package that we sent out for this commission meeting, there was a spreadsheet that basically, or a table that showed how the next 5 years, what projects are going to be funded and to what amount. And it's a complicated sheet that starts off with on the top, it's got the amount of monies that are coming, that are going to be expended. But on the bottom, it actually shows the revenues. And obviously, in order to spend the money, you have to have the revenue. So this particular year, we noticed that we had a challenge consisting of the fact that we had forecast for $3.4 million, but we've actually only received $58,000 year to date, which is a massive shortfall. Why did this happen? It happens because the other $3.35 million, let's say, is due in by developers, and it's a lot of money, and based on the economy or other factors that we may not be aware of, decide to actually either accelerate or postpone payments or try to work in credits if possible, as we were just discussing, in order for these fees to be reduced, delayed, postponed, or, you know, just because of the fact that the actual project that they're developing may, for whatever reason, be held up. So the revenue is totally uncontrollable by Parks and Recreation. We just need to wait for the developer to decide when the right time for them is to come in and make the payment. As a result, we're always reforecasting as to how to best spend the money based on the urgency of the situation, or the need to rehabilitate certain parks as necessitated by our own staff or by community outreach. So the other thing that we should also mention is that the preceding item that was discussed is also likely to impact us post 22-23 once a decision is made about what model to follow, because obviously depending on what comes up and whether we decide, for instance, to apply to collect fees from commercial projects, which for the time being are excluded, you know, they also may, and how our regular residential projects are impacted, there may be a knock-on effect unknown until a decision is made as to what that means for the fees that we will be collecting. So what I wanted to show this evening, that prior to the reforecast that we did, as you can see, I've got a stacked bar chart, which is very colorful, and each different color basically shows a different project. So, and then there's a blue line that kind of like overrides these, which is the revenue that we were expecting to collect. So if you have a look, for instance, in 2022-23, the year coming up, we were expecting to collect about $4.3 million, or have an expenditure of $4.3 million, based on the fact that we were thinking that we would have a lot more funding coming in. So therefore, as you can see as well, the stack charts kind of follow the revenue lines as they are coming in annually. However, in this given year that we've had a massive shortfall, this has meant that obviously the revenue has been much lower, and therefore we can't spend what we were anticipating to spend. And as a result, we had to reforecast, and basically this is one of the highlights of this presentation, is that as such, we are now trying to cut our suit to match our cloth, as they say, and therefore we will be spending much less in 22-23, namely only monies on East Hillsdale, for instance, because of the fact that we don't have the revenue or the money in order to be as ambitious as we were intending to be. As a result, we've also identified that the monies that we were expecting to come in this year are likely to be pushed back. And this can be really seen in this table, because it shows that basically we've reprofiled and we've pushed the spending back to 24, 25, 25, 26. And that's, again, the projects haven't changed. It's just a real reprofiling of the expenditure that we were planning on doing. In doing so, obviously, you know, there may be projects that we wanted to do earlier, but we won't be able to. And as such, we need to prioritize based on the monies that we have coming in. So this is the challenge that we have. And as a result, it's also quite evident that in an environment as this, planning for further than 3 years is very, very hard. The way that we approach this situation at the moment is that every year or every 6 months, Dennis is kind enough to actually follow up with the planners and project developers to understand when they expect to make these payments come in. But realistically, that's all we can do. We can't do anything else but ask them to give us a timeline. So as a result, once we do get that timeline, we then adjust our forecast expenditures to suit. And that is the crux of the presentation that I had this evening, and what I wanted to demonstrate to the Commission, that although the projects haven't changed and we are still talking about rehabilitating or investing in the same projects that we have been for the past couple of years, no new ones have emerged. But the reality is that, again, because the revenue collection is out of our control, we've had to reforecast and reprofile our expenditure. So unless there's any questions or any clarification that is required.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, Commissioner Fields.
Yeah, you kind of alluded to the idea that the developer kind of decides when they pay the fees. Do we not set any restrictions on that? Or I don't, can you kind of just clarify how this
Sure.
timeline works?
So let's just basically say that a developer, and I'm gonna use the developer of a duplex because it's the same as a larger developer. Okay, so let's just say that because it affects people the same way, really. So let's just say that you've got a parcel of land and you want to do a subdivision, and the cost is $27,000, because that's how much it is at the moment, $27,172. You may not have, and I know that number because that's what we've received this year, two lots of those payments, and you may not have factored that money in. So therefore, when you come back to the city to get all your permits, you find out that you've got to make an immediate payment in cash of $27,172 to complete your subdivision for a duplex. At that point, you may or may not have that money. So therefore, you may decide to postpone it for a year until you get that money together.
Got it.
On a much larger scale, it may be the same thing. Let's just say that somebody is going to do pre-sales of apartments, and those pre-sales haven't materialized because it was a pandemic year. So again, you may just choose to offset it for a year until you've got the pre-sales have come in or the interest has materialized. And at that point, you can make an informed decision of whether this is this is something that you want to sink more money into, or you'd rather wait. So hence, that's why the developer makes a decision. Of course, in January or February, early in the year, I don't know if you recall, we presented the fee schedule. In a normal year, and this is a very good segue to that actually, in a normal year, we will adjust those fees for developers. And therefore, if the real estate market has been steady and the fees haven't increased, there may be a very good reason for you to say, well, if I pay this year, it's 27,000. If I pay in 12 months, it's 29,500. So for those $2,000, I might just wait and see whether, the economy improves, my, revenue sources improve. And the same thing goes also for the large scale developer. In those 12 months, maybe we'll see a lot more interest. And usually what happens as a knock-on effect is that we usually see a lot of developers make payments in the last week of June, because they're trying to push back that payment for as long as they can before the escalation on the very last week. So we saw that last year. So that's what happens. And that's what I mean by they make a decision. The overall permit, I think, has an expiration date, but whilst it isn't expired, that's what happens. And the developers, again, do their own financial planning to get to where they need to get to.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
My pleasure.
Can I chime in for a little bit here regarding the shortfall this year. I think a large part of that was due to the fact that of the Kiko Crossing project, which was issued, their permits were issued this year, and we were supposed to get the fees. But there was, since this is a 100% affordable housing project, I guess there was some agreements made where they would postpone the payment of the fee until occupancy. So just thought you should know.
Thank you, Dennis.
Interesting. Any other questions about this?
I'm still taking this in. It's a little bit shocking. Is this something that we go through routinely where we really struggle with this uncertainty, or is this larger in scale this time around?
I think this time around it's larger in scale. Usually, you know, we might be pleasantly surprised, but this particular year we were just kind of caught, like, you know, I've been tracking this since January, and it was just because that's kind of when we start, every January we start looking at the fees collected and what have you, just to get an idea of how, you know, how our spending is going to shape up. And like I said, in January we had only collected $27,000. So at that point it was quite alarming. And of course the Kiko Crossing that Dennis just mentioned, I mean, that was an agreement between the developer and the city to afford them that benefit. But it's just, I think this year is just really highlights the, you know, the extreme, I guess, of when this happens.
Right.
But it's not something that we've had in the past, because I mean, the past 10 years in the Bay Area have been quite steady in terms of the economic activity and the, you know, cost of housing. I'm going to stop. Do you want me to leave the table on, or is it? What does the gallery prefer?
Well, I think we have to open this for public comment. So I think unless there's some other questions, we will go ahead and do that. Giovanna, do you have anybody interested in making public comment on this topic?
Chair Massey, we do have Martin Wiggins with his hands raised. Martin, if you could unmute yourself.
Good evening, Martin. Can you hear us?
Oh, yes, sorry, I was on mute. I had
Wonderful.
Good evening, and thank you, Chair Massey and Mr. Ciordos for your presentation. A couple of things. It looked to me like the y-axis on your before and after was a bit different, and it may have had the impact of making it look like an even more drastic drop. But just doing the math on both of them, it looks like you had 28 million spend before and just 24 million now. So still an appreciable difference, but I was curious if you, and I don't know if I can really ask questions, but if it could be addressed, it would be helpful to understand that it looks like that 4 million didn't get shifted. It's 4 million worth of spend that's just not there anymore. For example, Central Park looks like it went from 10 million of spend to 8. And so as someone, as I mentioned earlier, who lives in Hayward Park, we have the tiny park, Hayward Square, and we also have the very nice park, Central Park, but we're excited for that new playground. So was just trying to track its progress and understanding why it appears to have been shrunk. And so just hoping to get clarification on that overall, and a plug for trying to preserve Central Park as sort of the gem of the city, and then admittedly close to my house. That was it. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Wiggins, first of all, thank you for your question, and also thank you for reaching out earlier in the week to get with questions about this process. I really appreciate it, and we always invite the public to make as many comments and questions as possible. It's your city as much as it is anybody else's that lives in the city. So the graph that I have that I presented has got two different scales. If you look in the before and after the vertical axis had a larger number. That's because of the fact that the numbers have shifted. It wasn't sleight of hand in any way. It was just the fact that it's two different tables, and therefore they present themselves differently because of the amounts. So it had nothing, as I said, it's not sleight of hand. It's just the way that Excel calculates it or translates it into a table. In regards to the actual spend, we have shifted. Like I said, it's the reprofiling. So in terms of the 4 million that is that you say is missing, because I'm on a single screen, I can't bring up the other spreadsheet to do the calculation. But the only thing I can think of is that we literally reduced the amount of revenue, and therefore the amount of revenue for one that we're expecting over the next 5 years. That's one factor that would affect that table. And then secondly, in regards to the spend, we've just really shifted the expenditure back to once again 24, 25, as opposed to being front loaded as it was before. I don't know whether I can't answer your question on the spot with confidence, because like I said, I would need to have a second screen to bring up the Excel spreadsheet. And because I'm working on a laptop, I just don't have that luxury, sir.
Okay, Mr. Wiggins, thank you very much for your comments. Giovanna, do we have anybody else?
There are no other attendees, Chair Massey.
Okay, then we're going to close the public comment period and return this to the commission for comments.
Chair Massey, could I just make one more comment?
Good. Yeah, sure.
Mr. Wiggins reached out to me by email earlier in the week, as I mentioned. I would like to invite Mr. Wiggins, if you'd like to email me once again with a specific question, and I will respond to him tomorrow once I'm at my desk and I've got the spreadsheet in front of me, and I will be more than happy to answer any questions. I wasn't trying to avoid the answer. It's just that, as I said, I don't have I can't answer it right now because of the technology constraints that I've got. But he'd be more than welcome. He's got my contact details. He'd be more than welcome to reach out to me by email with any specific questions, and we'll take those. I'll answer them to the best of my ability.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so comments from the commission. Who's going first? Anybody have anything to say about it? Or
I mean, I'm really blown away by this difference in money. I'm still thinking about that. And I'll say I'm a little bit worried, but I don't really know what to say beyond that. Commissioner Held, maybe you look like you're about to say something. Maybe you'll fill in my.
I'm still in shock too. I think I said that before versus probably asking some questions. But I mean, I think feel for you, Nicholas. Like, this is a serious situation and not a good one to be in. And I appreciate that some of this is just uncontrollable, and we're going to do the best we can to prioritize where the needs are. And I think your plan in that regard makes sense. You know, I know that this is rare and we haven't seen it happen before, but I think right now we're hoping for this to turn around next year. My concern is, what if that doesn't happen, right? I mean, then what is plan B, and how are we thinking about that now? And are there other things that we should be doing to get ahead of concerns here? And like, how can we be helpful to you with that? Because I'm worried as well. So,
of course, the best way to answer that is that so every year, as we plan for two things. We sometimes can't do a whole project in one go. So basically, something like Central Park.
Mhm.
So we kind of bank money and spend money. And then the other thing that happens is that, as is the usual case with capital improvement projects, you can do all the planning in the world, but they just don't materialize at the speed that you want. And then once they materialize, they don't get built as quickly as you like.
Mhm.
So one of the benefits that, not benefits, but one of the outcomes of this is that if you, the sheet shows that we have a balance that basically we haven't drawn down on. And that balance is, for instance, is a combination of monies that we have earmarked for projects and monies that we are ready to spend. Where the earmarking is, we say that, you know what, we've got $4 million saved, but we need another 2. And then where we are ready to spend, well, we've got $4 million that we are ready to expend. So when we reprofile, what we're saying, what we in effect do is we pretty much build. We keep, we may not be able to build the kitty this year for the projects that we are earmarking, but we do have the funds, thanks to Sheila's conservative planning, to for instance, get something like Central Park Playground off the ground.
Right.
So hopefully, because of the fact that at the moment, the monies that we were hoping to collect this year would have been, in this particular year, would have been, say, a 50-50 split of expenditure and saving. It's basically, we're not going to be able to save as much as we'd like. If that happens next year, well, once again, we will still be able to complete the project that we wanted to complete. But once they are done, then in year 3, at that point, we may not have the money in the bank to start something else. What can you do to help? You can be understanding. We, as a community, can try to raise more funds, and obviously understanding the mechanics of the presentation that we saw earlier. That's the impetus of switching to a different model in order to because like Dennis said, we don't have access to general fund monies. So we need to kind of be innovative in the way that we raise revenue for these parks to rehabilitate, which is one thing, or acquire land for others.
That's helpful. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Well said. Thank you, Commissioner Held, for getting the question out.
Okay. I guess I don't really have anything to add to what my fellow commissioners had to say about this. I do know that the core of the system is that the park in lieu fees become payable from construction projects, and there are rules around when in the life of a project the fees become payable. And as Nicholas was pointing out, developers have a certain degree of flexibility in terms of saying, yes, we had planned to progress this project and to arrive at a point where the fee would be due and payable in the 21-22 fiscal year. But given what's happened to the economy, we're not so sure about this. We want to put a hold on our project for a year and wait and see how things turn out. Then the fee doesn't become due and payable. The generation of the fee is dependent upon the construction of the development and construction of projects. And so we are captives of the real estate construction industry, really, and the pace of development, of new development in our city. And I think, this is extreme, but I think it's inherent in this funding mechanism that the developers become liable for the fee when their projects hit a certain point in their development. And if the project doesn't hit that point in the development, the fee isn't due and payable. Nicholas, have I more or less got this right?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely correct. And that is, we have calculated fees on projects in the past that have simply dried up and gone away.
Well, that's the other thing is that.
And we have no real control over that.
No, I mean, that's the other thing is that projects get planned and never get built. And I mean, some of these projects, we just got a notice about new project to tear down the Hillsdale Inn and build a mixed use there. I remember looking at a plan for that. It must have been 10 years ago. And it was the same thing. And the Planning Commission got all the plans and the information and so forth. And I think in the end, they couldn't get it funded. And so that just went away. And I'm sure at some point or other, Park and Rec would have taken that potential project in trying to plot out when a fee might be coming in. But that one never got built. Now we're back again, but we're back at square one. So I don't know at what point that project, assuming that it progresses, might generate a fee. But we don't know.
And I think that, to the extent that I think Commissioner Held asked what you could do. So I think there's really two things. I think, certainly continue to communicate to the policymakers that there probably needs to be other sources of funds for park improvements other than park in lieu fees, for the exact same reason that you are seeing tonight, is that they are so unreliable. And yet, when a park is 30 years old and you need to replace the playground, there's really not a whole lot that you can do about that. It needs to be replaced. We don't have a lot of flexibility. So I think to continue to advocate for, can there be other sources of funds for park improvements? Because I think this is chronic and historic. And so while some of you may be hearing it for the first time, this is not the first time, certainly in my tenure, that we have had these wide swings in terms of money not coming in. So I think it's just the unpredictability of the nature of the funding source. So I would just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. I appreciate that. Okay, before we leave this topic, any final comments from the commission? Anything?
Just that it seems clear that, an additional or, secondary revenue source that at least could supplant this fund if it doesn't reach a certain level would seem reasonable to explore. I think, look, if there's a lot of development and this money is coming in, then maybe that money could be used elsewhere. But in these times when development isn't as plentiful, maybe there's some city funds that could be used here.
I think that exploring all of this is definitely worthwhile.
And I'll just pile on and say, I'd love to figure out how do we do that, right? How do we actually leave tonight and not just say that, but what can we actually do about it? And yeah. But Nicholas, thank you for sharing this, and we're here to support you and be understanding, and we've got your back. So,
well, I think what something that we could do in that regard is to have this topic put on the agenda for a future meeting. That's really that's what we're here to do, and we can do that. So unless somebody else has another comment, perhaps we'll leave it there for tonight. Okay, Nicholas, thank you so much. That was very illuminating, and I'm sure you can see you've educated us tonight. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Okay, so now we're up to reports and announcements. Sheila, what do you have for us?
So I think Chair Massey may have mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, but this is the last all virtual meeting that we will be having. The emergency order that allows all virtual meetings expires on May 18th. And so henceforth, moving forward, the expectation will be that there will be in-person meetings with the ability for the public to still call in on a virtual basis. So really starting at the June meeting, that will be, I think, the first in-person meeting. And I can certainly, explain in greater detail about the expectations for commissioners to be in person. There is a very limited option for commissioners to still be able to call in and be in attendance. However, there are very onerous requirements from the old Brown Act that also go into effect, which means that if you are a commissioner that does not want to attend in person, that you have to we have to post your address of where you are. You have to post a meeting notice where you live. And technically anybody from the public could show up at where you are to attend the meeting. And I think for most commissioners, because of that requirement, most commissioners plan on being back in person starting in June. So we will get you more details about what that looks like and about what the protocol will be, but moving forward, that will be the expectation for both the city council as well as commissions.
Okay, I guess one question about that I would have is, and I know that in other commission situations in other cities, this has come up, and that is policy around commissioners wanting to wear masks in the meeting. Is there so far at least any restriction on that, or?
So mask wearing is always going to be an option. So right now the city follows whatever the current county and state of California Health Department guidelines are, and that is, at least as of today, that may be subject to change in the future, but as of today, masks are not required in indoor situations. However, it's the prerogative of any commissioner or anybody from the public and wishing to come to a meeting or come to City Hall to always wear to wear a mask. So that always will remain an option.
Okay. All right. Any other things that we should be aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Any announcements, comments from any of the commissioners?
None here.
Okay, well, on that note, I will thank you all very much for the attendance tonight, and we've had a pretty intense meeting here, but I think we got quite a bit accomplished. And thank you, Sheila, for organizing all this and managing to drag a quorum of us out and get this done. So we'll see you all in June. And Sheila, I assume that you and I will be in touch between now and then about how we're going to organize the June meeting.
We will be.
Okay. Well, then we're adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Good night, guys.
Good night, everybody.